Should Canada pick a side in the armed conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan? One Canadian senator thinks so. That's after the next break.
The situation in Nagorno-Karabakh remains of utmost concern to us. I spoke directly with Prime Minister Pashinyan a few weeks ago, as well as to President Erdogan, insisting on moving forward peacefully, de-escalating, respecting the ceasefires.
The third attempt at an internationally brokered ceasefire in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict failed this week, with each side blaming the other for reigniting hostilities. Violence has raged for weeks now. An estimated 5,000 soldiers and more than 100 civilians on both sides have been killed. Now, one Canadian senator is calling on this government to recognize the independence of the disputed region and to, quote, immediately condemn the joint Azerbaijani-Turkish aggression against Armenians. Housakos is a Conservative senator who put forward this motion. I spoke with him earlier this afternoon from Montreal. Welcome back to the program, Senator.
Thank you for having me on.
Help me understand, why do you want Canada's Senate to take a side, essentially, in this conflict?
Well, I think we look at this conflict, and some people have framed it as a conflict, some people have framed it as a war. The truth of the matter is, unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation being spread around. We have here a battle between David versus Goliath. We have a battle between 150,000 Armenian Christians in Nagorno-Karabakh being basically pushed out of their homes, pushed out of their place of birth, a place that they've existed for centuries, by the Azerbaijanis, a nation of 10 million, being supported by a military power in the region in Turkey. And if there's ever been an injustice, there's an injustice. And I, as a senator, I felt compelled to be a voice for those that don't have a voice, for those that are right now on the verge of facing a second genocide. The people of Armenia, as we know, in 1915 at the hands of Turkey, faced already a genocide. 1.5 million Armenians perished. And now they're surrounded again in a situation where their life is at risk. And the Western world, because of geopolitical issues and realpolitik, it seems that these people have been forgotten. So I felt compelled to speak on behalf of these individuals.
I do want to talk more broadly about the efforts that are being made to try to bring an end to this conflict. But I want to understand, with the motion that you are putting forward, do you believe that your motion, were it to be accepted, could in some way help contribute to an end to hostilities, or is this about a question of principle for you?
Both. On the first side of the motion, I'm calling for the ban on Canadian military equipment being sold to Turkey to be respected and honored. The Trudeau government a year ago, last October, put forward a ban on Canadian military technology being sold to Turkey after Turkey's egregious behavior in Syria, a behavior that's not becoming of a NATO partner. And of course, that ban should have been respected. We have found out in the last few weeks, in the last few days, that that ban was not respected. Somehow it was contravened, or they got an exemption, and Canadian military technology was sold to the Turks, and that technology was given to the Azerbaijanis and used to kill innocent men, women, and children, civilians, right now in Nagorno-Karabakh. It's something that Canadians should not be proud of. Furthermore,
I want to stop. Actually, Senator, I'm going to stop you there just because I do want you to address that issue before we move on. As I'm sure you know quite well, the Canadian government, the Foreign Affairs Minister, today the Prime Minister have been asked about that. They have said, exports have been stopped, an investigation is underway. Is that the appropriate response to your mind? At this
sure, there needs to be. Well, we need answers. Parliamentarians, both in the House of Commons last week, were bringing up these questions at committee. We've brought these questions up to the government leader in the Senate. We're asking simple questions. Why is it since April, when Prime Minister Trudeau had a phone conversation with President Erdogan of Turkey, a few weeks later, a few months later, this technology, Canadian technology, started being sold to the Turks in contravention of their own ban.
You're suggesting willfulness on the part of the Prime Minister specifically. Do I understand that correctly?
Two elements here. Either this has been done deliberately and an exemption was given to the Turkish government, or incompetence, and this government was not able to monitor and make sure that the ban they put in place was respected. Either way, These are very, very troubling circumstances.
Well, certainly the Canadian government has given no indication that it is being done deliberately, and they do say that they are investigating right now. Is that not the appropriate course of action at this point?
I am happy that Minister Champagne has announced now a second ban, which again highlights how Turkey has been involved in this particular conflict, has been exasperating the conflict, and using the Azerbaijanis as a tool in their geopolitical operation.
But this, I guess this brings the discussion back around to where we started, Senator, which is, are you not ultimately pushing Canada? I mean, according to what our colleagues have reported, this would make, your motion would make Canada Senate the first national legislative body in the world to do something like this. Are you not pushing Canada to take a side rather than doing what the Canadian government has stated is its purpose thus far, which is to try to work to bring about a peaceful resolution to this conflict?
I'm pushing our Canadian government to do what we've always done. We've been peacemakers, we've been peacekeepers, and in this particular instance, all anyone has to do is look at this map. You look at the map of this region in Nagorno-Karabakh, where there's 150,000 Armenian Christians who have been living there for centuries. They are the vast majority of the population in this region. Only a few years ago, they had a referendum where they expressed themselves democratically. And what they've asked for is to be recognized as the state of Artsakh, independent of Azerbaijan, independent of Armenia, to be left alone so they can pursue their life in peace. And what is going on right now is you have Turkey on one side, you have Iran on the other side, you have Azerbaijan on one side, and you have Russia on the other side. When you have neighbors like the two countries I mentioned, Iran and Turkey, that are the world's largest sponsors of jihadist terrorism, you have Russia on the other side, who's basically giving Iran and the Armenian people ultimatums, which is, we'll protect you, but you got to sell your souls to the tyrants and dictators. That's the condition that these people have found themselves in.
Senator Housakos, geopolitics obviously play a role in all of this, but I am trying to understand, is ultimately you believe Canada should play something of a role of an arbiter rather than simply focusing on helping the international community reach some sort of ceasefire or cessation of tensions?
That's a very good point. Well, we've had now 3 ceasefires negotiated by OSCE chair countries, Russia, the United States, and France. All 3 were completely ignored by the Azerbaijani military. So we have already seen over decades now that negotiations don't work. We have seen that ceasefires only work for a temporary period of time. I believe the only solution, it's a bold solution, I understand that, but the world has to stand up at some point and put aside the geopolitical issues at hand. They should put aside the self-serving economic issues at hand and do the right thing. I believe by recognizing Artsakh as an independent state, you will eliminate this conflict for once and for all. Respect the democratic process. Respect the democratic referendum that was taken in Nagorno-Karabakh and the willingness of the people to basically have self-determination.
Have you asked your Conservative colleagues in the House to put forward a similar motion? Because what I have heard from Conservative Foreign Affairs critic Michael Chong is certainly not as strongly worded a statement as you have put forward. He has simply said part of the Conservative plan is to recognize the right to self-determination of people in the region, and that is not nearly what you're calling for.
Right now, the onus of responsibility falls on the government of Canada. It's Mr. Trudeau and the government of Canada that speaks for the nation of the country and has influence on the global scene.
That does sound like a no from your counterparts in the House, though, sir.
Well, my counterparts in the House have taken a clear stance that we want to have a ceasefire. We need to have a bilateral agreement, but clearly they haven't worked. And at the end of the day, I think it's incumbent upon the Trudeau government to take a more serious stand than they've taken. Furthermore, as a senator, I express also a view that I believe the Senate's in a position to express. We're there to defend, like I said, the injustices that are going on. This is not a war between 2 independent nations. This is an independent nation, a powerful one, Azerbaijan, with 10 million people, fully militarized and armed in support by the Turkish military power, trying to invade 150,000 Armenian people in Nagorno-Karabakh that don't have the ability to defend themselves. And you know what? At some particular point in time, we have to understand, just because the people don't have oil, they don't have gas, they don't have natural resources, they cannot be discarded because they're somehow less valuable than other geopolitical interests in the region. And this is what I believe my motion is all about. And I'll tell you this, we are living in a timely situation here because the Azerbaijani army is right now moving forward step by step, and in a matter of days, they will have full control of the Nagorno-Karabakh region. And what will be the outcome What will be the outcome will be a second Armenian genocide. And the Canadian government, we will have blood on our hands if we don't take action.
I think it is important that we do say at this point in the interview, sir, that both sides have alleged that there's been targeting, killing of civilians by both of the other sides. I do want to ask you, though, about one other issue before I let you go, also having to do with geopolitics, but very different, which is that the Conservative leader in the Senate, Don Plett, made it clear that he has a preference for Donald Trump the other day, and that did receive some media attention. I just wonder whether or not you think it is appropriate for Canadian politicians to be giving their opinion on politics in the United States so close to an election.
I take exception with your comment that both sides have suffered casualties. Today, we had the Azerbaijani government announce they've had 91 casualties. I can tell you on the Armenian side, there's been over 2,500 casualties already. The balance of casualties is not the same. Furthermore, like I said, the Armenian people in the region of Nagorno-Karabakh have not been supplied military equipment by any neighboring forces. Azerbaijan has. And the Canadian government is also responsible when we have Canadian military technology being used by Turkey and siphoned over into Azerbaijan to kill innocent Armenians in the region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, in terms of your question about which parliamentarian is backing who in the United States, I'm a Canadian politician. I go out of my way to disengage from the democratic processes of our democratic neighbor to the south. I'm preoccupied with what my Canadian government is doing, what my Canadian parliamentarians are doing in terms of standing up for Canadian values. And that's the only thing I'm concerned with and interested in. I'll let the Americans take care of their elections, and I'll worry about our government and holding my government to account.
Okay.
And I suggest the CBC and the media should be more preoccupied with Canadian parliamentarians and Canadian issues. God knows we have enough of them, and far less time with American elections.
Thank you very much for your time today, Senator.
Thank you so much.
To dig further into the situation right now in Nagorno-Karabakh, we wanted to speak with someone who is in Armenia covering the story. Neil Hauer is a Canadian freelance journalist and security analyst. Welcome back to the program, Neil.
Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you about a couple of things that came up in our interview with Canadian Senator Leo Housakos. One of the things that he said is that if the Azeris are to take over, that there is a fear that there will be a second Armenian genocide. You are on the ground. What are you hearing there?
I mean, I think I hesitate to use the word genocide just because I'm not sure how many people will even be left there, given how many have already fled. But I absolutely think if the Azerbaijan succeeds in militarily reconquering Karabakh, that there will be mass ethnic cleansing. I mean, in terms of civilians who have already left will not be able to come back, civilians who remain behind. There is such a level of ingrained, institutionalized state hatred towards Armenians in Azerbaijan that I think that even if an order were to come from Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev to leave civilians unharmed, it would not be obeyed by troops and commanders on the ground. And I think, yeah, that's something that actually is downplayed too much in this conflict, is that I don't see any scenario in which Azerbaijan captures major civilian centers in Karabakh and there is not mass ethnic cleansing.
In terms of what we know about the casualties thus far, in my conversation with the senator, I did point out that, of course, both sides have alleged that the other side is responsible for casualties. The senator responded that the vast majority of those casualties are Armenians, that it is Armenians who are outnumbered, that they're primarily the ones being killed. Do we have any sense when it comes to the casualties of the breakdown of deaths amongst the two sides?
Yeah, so in terms of casualties, in terms of military casualties, I think it's relatively even between the two sides. In terms of civilian casualties, I mean, it's hard to confirm the exact numbers, but as far as we know, there have been significant numbers. There have been as the Azerbaijani government says, that there's about 70 civilian deaths on their side, which is, I mean, impossible to verify this number, but then by the Armenian and Karabakh side, they say the number is about 40 to 50, which is not necessarily an indication that, the Armenians are trying more to kill civilians. I mean, the Azerbaijanis have shelled cities in Karabakh indiscriminately over the past month, but civilians there have been largely in basements or have fled already. But Armenian forces have struck civilian centers. They struck yesterday Amnesty International just confirmed today that there was a strike by Armenian forces yesterday on the Azerbaijani city of Barda using banned cluster munitions. And while Azerbaijan began this cycle and used cluster munitions first against civilian settlements and much more heavily in terms of striking civilian settlements, the Armenian forces have now a number of times responded in kind.
I want to ask you, the reason we asked you on the program today initially was in fact to talk about the use of Canadian technology in these Turkish-made drones. You were actually able to photograph some of that technology. So tell us about what you found.
Yeah, so there's been a number of reports. The Armenian and Karabakh armed forces have claimed that they've downed around a dozen of these Turkish TB2 Bayraktar drones now so far. And at the very least, they have one that they downed. I think this was down on October 19th that is in their possession that they recovered. And so I've been to see this drone here in Yerevan at the Armenian Aviation Academy. And this drone, I mean, it is what they say it is. And when I was there visiting it, I could see very clearly the Westcam camera on the turret, the optical turret on it. And so this is the uncontrovertible proof that these Canadian exported cameras are being used in Azerbaijan's ongoing military offensive. Can
you tell us any more about what we know about how they're being used?
Yeah, so these drones have been employed extremely effectively. And essentially, you know, it's something I think similar to the U.S. Predator drone, the Reaper Predator drone, in terms of these are drones that they operate at a height of about 5 kilometers, which is beyond anything that Armenians have that can hit them usually. And they use guided munitions, smart munitions, and these have had a devastating effect on Armenian casualties. I mean, they've taken out now over 100 Armenian battle tanks, huge amounts of artillery, rocket artillery, strikes on clumps of Armenian troops, and have also been used to strike civilian centers. So this has been a massive new element in this conflict.
On Monday, in the midst of everything you're talking about on Monday, a third attempt by Russia, France, and the U.S. to broker a ceasefire failed to end the fighting. So what can you tell us right now about what is happening on the ground and whether the prospect of a ceasefire in any sort of near future seems possible?
I mean, I think the prospects of a ceasefire are unfortunately pretty dim, especially in terms of Azerbaijan launched this war as it launched a well-planned offensive to retake territory. And Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has made many, many maximalist, bellicose statements. And so now he's almost a victim of his own rhetoric. And then he has said repeatedly to the Azerbaijani people that he is going to retake the entirety of Karabakh, and that they are going to recapture the entirety of the disputed territory. And so now not only is the military situation on the ground going well for Azerbaijani forces, but I think he feels that he needs to deliver on this. And so his incentive to take any ceasefire is extremely limited.
Okay. Neil Hauer, thank you for bringing us up to speed on this.
No problem. Thank you again.
It is Canadian freelance journalist and security analyst Neil Hauer from Yerevan, Armenia. Following our interview with Conservative Senator Leo Housakos, we reached out to the Azerbaijan embassy to Canada for a response. In a statement provided to CBC News, the Chargé d'Affaires said it was aware of the motion introduced in the Senate yesterday, saying the embassy, quote, strongly condemns the biased speech of Senator Leo Housakos. The statement goes on to say he, quote, continuously ignores basic democratic and human rights of almost 1 million internationally displaced persons and refugees from the occupied Azerbaijani territories. The statement also says, quote, Armenian acts of aggression violate the fundamental norms and principles of international law and the UN Security Council resolutions 822, 853, 874, and 884. We also asked the Turkish embassy for a response to Conservative Senator Leo Housakos. In part, the embassy statement reads, Armenia tries to play the victim. In fact, it is the aggressor. If it is for peace and stability, Armenia should end its illegal occupation. And a report on the wires just now says that Armenia and Azerbaijan have just agreed to not deliberately target civilian populations and engage in an exchange of bodies on the battlefield.